I think the problem with Keir Starmer is it's very difficult to tell what he believes in, and that means it's difficult to predict how he will behave in an emergency scenario or faced with a huge economic challenge like this.
While I don't agree with much of what Ed Miliband is doing in the brief he has, I think what he and Yvette Cooper bring to the table is experience of government, which almost none of their cabinet level colleagues have. I think Trump will respond as Trump likely does. He'll lash out, he'll blame other people, he'll probably whack up some more tariffs because it's everyone else's fault except his. He hasn't got long to make an impact positively for the people who voted for him. Otherwise, it starts to look quite tricky, and being the sort of personality he is, you can only assume he'll lash out. He's not going to go, sorry, my bad, I didn't do the right things. That's not something Donald Trump, I think, has ever done.
We did get a sort of spurious legal threat following your article from a delivery company known for particularly poor service. They were sort of making vague threats related to this article, and I thought, well, what are you going to do? Deliver a summons 3 days late to the wrong address? Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Welcome to Free Thinking, where we discuss the sharpest takes and most insightful analysis from City AM's opinion pages, with me, Alys Denby, opinion and features editor of City AM. This week, we'll be asking what Margaret Thatcher would make of Keir Starmer's plans to cut red tape for businesses and get people off welfare and into work, whether Elon Musk is a reputational risk to his own company, and why it's so hard to get your online shopping delivered. And to answer these burning questions, I'm excited to be joined by my friend Emma Revell, External Affairs Director at the Centre for Policy Studies and, of course, a City AM columnist. So Emma, welcome. Thanks for joining me. He's best known as the son of a toolmaker, but Keir Starmer took up the pen for City AM this week and wrote an op-ed for us about how he's going to cut red tape and unleash the animal spirits of business. What did you make of this?
Well, it's nice to have a Prime Minister that sounds a bit like a Tory for a change. All of this deregulation, you go, oh, this is nice, this sounds good. I think I'm inclined to give him some credit because it does sound good. He's saying the things that I think businesses want to hear.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that he's been saying the things business want to hear for a while. When Labour were in opposition, they knew that they would need, the support of business to regain credibility. They got that. They got people on board. They thought, okay, this is going to be better than we had expected, especially with historic sort of Labour oppositions of the last decade or so. And then got into government, and that's not what we saw. That's not what we saw from Rachel Reeves's budget. It's not what we've seen from several other announcements the government has made so far. So you sort of think, well, the rhetoric is great. The action doesn't quite match.
I mean, how does it feel? So you work for a free market think tank. How does it feel to be sort of almost, in a way, getting the things that you've asked for, but from the wrong team?
Well, we can't complain. The whole point of the Centre for Policy Studies is to push free market ideas. We want economic growth. We've spent a lot of time talking about how just fundamental getting back to economic growth is for the success of the country, individuals, businesses, the economy. It doesn't matter what sort of lens you're looking at it. We need economic growth to survive, never mind to thrive. So any politician who wants to talk about those things is, incredibly welcome, but they need to be held to account on what they actually do in practice.
I think the question here, as you exactly say, is delivery. And there's a deep irony, I think, with Keir Starmer talking about cutting regulation when at the same time his workers' rights bill is going to impose a whole bunch of new obligations and so on employers. So I agree with you. I think we do need to give this government credit. They're saying a lot of things that we want to hear. But I guess, are they going to manage to deliver it when at the same time, they're doing all these anti-business things?
And that I think is what worries people. Even if you are inclined to give some credit for the rhetoric, you have to sort of look not even just at Keir Starmer, the rest of his cabinet, and especially at his backbenchers. Some of the, if you go not necessarily looking at deregulation, but welfare reforms, these are also things that absolutely need to happen for the health of the economy and the people. Backbenchers are not happy with that. They're not going to be happy with some of the deregulatory measures that Keir Starmer wants to take. They're not going to be happy with some of the measures on housing that he wants to take. So he's going to have a challenge to bring the party with him and deliver.
And this is maybe a little bit think tank inside baseball, but there's kind of a deep irony that his new city minister, Torsten Bell, used to run the Resolution. It was one of the most critical think tanks whenever the welfare reforms were mentioned, and he's now having to go on the broadcast rounds defending this. And I think this brings into question, I don't think anybody in Labour thought they were getting into government to cut welfare and to cut regulations and so on. And I think their early actions in government suggest that, one of the first things they did was massive public sector pay rises. And of course, this workers' rights bill, you can tell this is something that Angela Rayner believes in.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing here is that, Keir Starmer's got into government faced with the reality, and that's now coming into conflict with his real values.
And I think the values of his backbenchers especially, he seems a little bit more comfortable with it. I think because he is a realist. I think he's quite pragmatic and is recognising the challenges that face the country. I think Rachel Reeves probably is as well to a certain extent. Not that she's fully captured the realism, the impact of, some of her budget measures. I think Liz Kendall as well probably does see the need. I think when you get into departments like the Treasury, you get into number 10, you get into the DWP, you look at the books, you see the numbers and you go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to do everything we want to do, and we're going to have to make some really tough decisions. And I think what has been a problem in the last, 14 years of Conservative governments is not everybody, but not enough politicians were willing to make those tough decisions or have the conversation with the British public about, well, here's why we need to do these things. I think that's important, whether it's welfare or housing or any sort of growth measure. Bringing the public with you and explaining this is the scale of the challenge. It is not sustainable. It is not good for us, and we need to change.
I think that brings us quite nicely. Look, I think the problem with Keir Starmer is it's very difficult to tell what he believes in, and that means it's difficult to predict how he will behave in an emergency scenario or faced with a huge economic challenge like this. But one person who was always clear about what she believed in was Margaret Thatcher, who the CPS was celebrating this week at the Margaret Thatcher conference. We had a keynote speech from Kemi Badenoch in which she very much tried to sort of adopt the mantle of Margaret Thatcher. And she had a great line, I think. It's like, you don't fix a broken nation by making the state bigger, but by making the people stronger. I did like that line. But what did you make of her speech? What did you think of this as a sort of launch of herself into the, I don't know, into the public consciousness?
I think it was a great speech. I think she got the message across she wanted to get across. But I think, she didn't make too many policy announcements. That's not what the speech was for. And she had another speech the next day, launching her policy commissions, talking a lot about net zero that made a lot of headlines. That was sort of where the meat of policy announcements was coming. I think what she intended to do and what she did by coming to the Centre for Policy Studies conference was speak to Tory faithful, Tory policymakers, free people who really truly believe in free markets as she does, and say, this is what I believe. I am with you. Here's how we're going to, get things done. Not the nitty gritty of, the implementation, but the spirit. I think she certainly got that across.
And what do you think? As you said, she also made another speech saying that reaching net zero by 2050 is impossible. I think you were talking about the need for politicians to be a bit braver and to be a bit more honest with the people about the scale of the challenge. Do you think that's what this represents?
I think so. And I think, it represents a discontent within the general public, not with, decarbonisation. I think the public, most polls, almost all polls show that the public are very concerned about climate change. It's one of their top concerns. They want to see mitigations. They want to see measures that reduce Britain's carbon impact in the world, but they don't want to do that at the expense of their own comfort, their own financial stability, their family's well-being. And that's something the public are very clear on. Conservative backbenchers are particularly clear on. And I think Kemi is simply responding to that and being realistic and saying, look, it's not about denying that we need to make change. It's not about saying that we don't need to decarbonise. It's about saying we need to decarbonise in a way that is sustainable, in a way that works for the economy, and also in a way that works for British industry. Because if we decarbonise off the back of deindustrialising the nation, that's, serious economic damage to the country.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think one person who probably doesn't agree with that is Ed Miliband.
Certainly not.
And we're talking about sort of Keir Starmer's problems with his own backbenchers. I think Ed Miliband is definitely a tricky one. How do you rate his chances of making it as far as the next election, I guess, in that job?
I would be inclined to think he probably won't be in that job in the next 4, I suppose now, years. Partly because he himself really truly believes in this. Yeah. And I think he is going to struggle if Keir Starmer says we need to water down some of these measures. I can see from his perspective, Ed Miliband's perspective, a principled resignation, essentially. I think he could say, no, I really do believe in this. I'm not able to keep collective responsibility. I don't want to water down these measures. So I'm thank you, but I'm going to step back because he has believed in this for so long. But I think while I don't agree with much of what Ed Miliband is doing in the brief he has, I think what he and Yvette Cooper bring to the table is experience of government, which almost none of their cabinet level colleagues have.
Yeah.
And I think that is important. So I think if I were Keir Starmer, you'd probably be more inclined to potentially try and move him, to sort of placate him if you can, keep his experience around the cabinet table. But I think Ed Miliband truly believes in his mission, as he sees it, on decarbonisation. So I think a principled resignation is more likely than him being in place come the next election.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another thing that touches on net zero, which we've been talking about a lot in City AM this week, is the fortunes of Tesla. So Tesla stocks have taken a massive hammering this week. I think sales are down by close to 50% in some jurisdictions. We've even had some investors say that Elon Musk needs to step down as CEO because his, close relationship with Donald Trump, he's, essentially the second man in that administration, is now becoming a reputational harm to his company. What do you make of this? I think it's just kind of an interesting object lesson in the challenges of mixing politics and business.
And the challenge of having a business that is so reliant on a figurehead in this way. When your business is so clearly associated with one person who has a big personality.
That's putting it politely.
I think that's the tactful way to phrase it. That can go either way. It can be a massive advantage, if all of your recognition is through someone who is, by many metrics, a great media performer. He attracts a lot of attention. That can be incredibly positive for an organisation. But when that doesn't go the way you would hope, the damage is significant. And I think that's what Tesla is seeing now.
I think it's also a question of when a business forgets that its main purpose should be maximising returns for its shareholders. You get involved in other stuff.
Yeah.
That's only going to lead one way. But I think this could have much bigger ramifications for the Trump administration. He saw a big sort of economic boost when he took office. There was lots of hope for the fortunes of Silicon Valley. Lots depends for him, I think, on delivering for his voters economically. Inflation's still high. It was, basically, it's always the economy, isn't it? And it was it was the effects of inflation that people were feeling in their lives thanks to the Biden administration, even though looking at it from our perspective, we see a massively booming economy. But if Silicon Valley can't sort of keep that momentum going, how do you think that plays out for Trump's fortunes domestically? I mean, I know we're not Americans here, but...
Well, I think it can only go badly. If some of the most productive parts of your economy are taking a massive hit, directly or indirectly because of things people within your administration are doing and saying, never mind, the impact that Trump's tariffs are likely to have once those kick in various jurisdictions, it's only going to be bad for him. I think Trump will respond as Trump likely does. He'll lash out, he'll blame other people, he'll probably whack up some more tariffs because it's everyone else's fault except his. But if, he's only got 18 months, 2 years, he can't run again. He might try because he's Donald Trump, but he should only do 2 terms. He hasn't got long to make an impact positively for the people who voted for him. Otherwise, it starts to look quite tricky. And being the sort of personality he is, you can only assume he'll lash out.
Yeah,
he's not going to go, sorry, my bad. I didn't do the right things. That's not something Donald Trump, I think, has ever done.
No, and it also feels like, economically speaking, he's forgotten that fundamental lesson of the sort of Reagan and Thatcher era, that free trade is the route to prosperity. Tariffs will only be American consumers who pay for tariffs. And we're also seeing what a sort of political backlash it's having with consumers here in Europe, rejecting American products like Tesla. I think the other interesting thing that Elliot Wilson covered in his column was that Trump himself has gone on a massive journey with electric cars. I think he's called them like a hoax. He doesn't really believe in net zero, but now he's like buying a Tesla and calling it beautiful. And I think it really reveals, well, what Elliot argues reveals, he doesn't have an economic policy. He only has personal grudges.
Yes, he has some very particular beliefs, not all of which are grounded in sort of economic reality. I think the other part of Elliot's piece I particularly liked was the point that Trump has bought a car he is not allowed to drive. The Secret Service will not allow current or former presidents to drive. So I don't know what he's going to do with it. Just park it somewhere and look at it occasionally.
Put it in a golden lift. And...
It's a wonder he didn't buy a gold one, to be honest.
Oh, God, yeah. All right, I think that's enough of Trump and Musk. Let's talk about an excellent column you wrote for us, which has proved very popular, on the travails of package delivery.
Yes, my unexpected career as a delivery driver. I didn't sign up for it. I didn't apply. I've become a parcel delivery person just because of the sheer sort of frustration of realising that when you buy things online, which we've all done, we all do daily, some people, I certainly weekly, packages arrive at my house or my office. But when those delivery services are contracted, you're actually not the customer. It's between that private delivery company and the retailer you bought from. They're the ones contracting that service. Your ability to receive the parcel is very much secondary.
Yeah.
You know, if you buy from a retailer, they need it out of their warehouse onto the delivery van drops it off. They might drop it off at your house, ideally inside your house. They might leave it on the doorstep. They might give it to a neighbour. They won't tell you which neighbour, and you go on some sort of weird game trying to introduce yourself to the whole neighbourhood going, do you have a parcel by any chance? They might say, oh no, you have to come and collect it from a delivery, you know, a depot. It's nowhere near you. You can't get it re-delivered. Or you can get it re-delivered, but only between 9 and 5. It's like, I'm not in my house, I'm in the office. Yeah, I didn't see this coming.
And I think an interesting sort of business point that you made is that normally, normally the way to improve customer service is through competition. But there's lots of competition in the courier industry, but it doesn't quite work for the consumer.
Yeah. Because you're not the one making the choice. So I think, the point I made in the column is it was triggered by a week in which I'd had 4 different delivery services try and come to my house, only one of which was partially successful in getting it to me on the day that I thought it was coming. Because I can't choose anything else. If someone tells me it's coming by courier A or courier B, that's a choice the retailer has made. Yeah. The only real choice you have is collect in store or delivery. You don't get to choose a delivery company because it's not convenient for the retailer to have to deal with, 2, 3, 4, 5 different courier services. But I think you could make that a premium service. You could make it pay, going, I'm happy to pay more because it means that I have a little bit more control about maybe a narrower window of delivery. You can already pay more for next day for expedited delivery, and people are very willing to do that. So it seems like something I'd certainly be first in the queue to go, yes, if I trust courier B, that's my preferred option.
Oh, what was quite funny is we did get a sort of spurious legal threat following your article from let's say a delivery company known for particularly poor service, so well known for bad service that it changed its name. But yes, they were sort of making vague threats related to this article, and I thought, well, what are you going to do? Deliver a summons 3 days late to the wrong address?
As long as they try and deliver it to you and not to me, that's fine. They shouldn't have a name that lends itself so readily to puns.
They should not. Well, I think that's where we shall wrap it up. But thanks so much for chatting through the week in opinion for Free Thinking.
Thanks for having me.